Hello. Alright, so we are at Reid.com and we're going to listen to one of their PowerPoint presentations about false confession issues.
My name is Joseph Buckley, President of John Reid and Associates. In this brief PowerPoint presentation entitled False Confession Issues, we will discuss the causes of false confessions and the protections offered by the Reid technique. Brandon Garrett from the University of Virginia Law School has reported that in the first 250 DNA exonerations from the Innocence Project, there were 41 false confessions, or 16%. These confessions, quote, all involved very long interrogations and mostly involved vulnerable juveniles or mentally disabled individuals.
Alright, now that obviously applies to Brendan here, doesn't it? Vulnerable juveniles or mentally disabled individuals. He was definitely both of those. Long interrogation, probably too. If you consider that he was questioned several times over the course of a couple of days. Some of those are videotaped. One is audio. There's also some that was done when they were at the resort that are not audio or videotaped at all, so we don't know what the hell was said there. But I would say that Brendan basically follows into every bit of this. Like you said, confessions all involved very long interrogations, and most involve vulnerable juveniles or mentally disabled individuals. Brendan.
The Innocence Project lists on their website the following as the primary causes of false confessions: duress, coercion, intoxication, diminished capacity, mental impairment.
Alright, I'm going to stop him. He's like right in the middle of his list just to go through these first 5. Duress, absolutely. Brendan obviously was under all kinds of duress. His uncle was arrested. He was upset. He lost his girlfriend. Lots of things are going on. The police, the detectives are questioning all of them in the family. There is bones found on the property right there by where he lived. I mean, this has got to be just absolutely horrible for him to see, hear, know about, and think, did my uncle have something to do with this? This is all over the news. All over the freaking news. Duress, coercion, absolutely coerced in his confessions. Intoxication, not so much. He doesn't drink. He's just a kid. Diminished capacity, absolutely. We went over that in Brendan's psychological evaluation. Definitely mental impairment. So there's the first 5. He has 4 of the first 5. Absolutely. Without question. Here we go.
Ignorance of the law, fear of violence, the actual infliction of harm, the threat of a harsh sentence, or misunderstanding the situation.
Okay. So here's the second 5. Ignorance of the law? Absolutely. Brendan had no idea what he was saying or what he was doing was going to get him into trouble. He had no idea that he had a right, even though he waived his Miranda rights, he had no idea that he had a right to have his mom there or get an attorney to be there to help protect him. He didn't know that he needed to be protected. Very much. He's a minor. He's a kid. He hadn't been in trouble before. Why would he know anything about this whole process? Of course he's ignorant of the law. Fear of violence? I don't think that he was physically afraid of the detectives, but I think that he was afraid that something would happen to him, that he would be in trouble. Whether it's, not necessarily physical, but that his uncle would be pissed if he tells all these things that didn't really happen. And if you watch the end of the March 1st video where he's telling his mom that he's obviously afraid what's going to happen if Steven's story is different than mine. He was worried that Steven was going to be pissed because he is lying and telling all these made up things, these things he's guessing. He says he's guessing. It's pretty clear that he is. So the actual infliction of harm, no, I don't think anybody actually physically harmed him. The threat of a harsh sentence. Yes, he's being threatened, very much so, that he is going to go to prison because the police have all this evidence proving that Steven did this and that he helped him. Which means, Steven's going to go to prison forever, for life. That's pretty harsh. Brendan, since he's involved, probably has a fear that he's also going to go to prison for life. I mean, he does say that he's afraid that he would get into trouble. He's afraid he'd get arrested. But still, misunderstanding of the situation. Number 5, or the 10th one on this list. He absolutely misunderstood the situation. He thought he was still going to go back to school to turn in his report in 6 hours. His report in 6 hours. He thought he was going back to school. So he thought that, well, if I cooperate with them and I tell them what they want, I get to leave. I get to go home. I get to go back to school. So there was so much confusion that he's afraid he's going to get arrested, but at the same time, he still thinks he's going to leave. So it makes no sense. He is so confused about what the hell is happening to him. So he had 4 of the first 5, and he has ignorance of the law, possible fear of violence, the threat of a harsh sentence, and misunderstanding of the situation. He is definitely, for sure, got at least 8 of these 10 signs of something that you should be aware of that would contribute to a false confession.
There are numerous basic principles that serve as the foundation for the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation, which offer built-in safeguards against false confessions, including the following. Oftentimes the Reid technique is described solely as an interrogation process, but to the contrary, we always begin with a non-accusatory interview, the purpose of which is to develop information that we can use to help determine investigative direction. In many cases, a series of subjects are only interviewed, they are never interrogated, because we never felt there was enough information available to suggest their involvement.
Okay, so basically what he's saying is they don't go off just fully attacking, Brendan, you did this, you're involved, we have all this evidence. They go and they say, hey, we're your friend, we're here to help you. Is something bothering you? What's going on? Did you see something, maybe? Did you hear something, maybe? They don't really have any evidence that any of this has happened yet. But they obviously are asking all the people in the family the same sorts of questions because they want to see who they can get to. This is pretty clear by the way that they start off their questioning with him every time. We're here to help you. We care. One of the detectives even says that, I'm not a police officer right now. I'm your friend. I want to get up and give you a hug. I'm a father. And, I see that you're hurting. I see that you're suffering. They come off as a friend. If you listen to the back and forth between the detectives and Brendan as they're having a police ride to go to an interview, it's being recorded, they're talking about random things, about the weather, about hunting, school, and, things like that. So they're being buddies with him at first. They're not attacking him or being accusatory to get his trust. Also, to just get an idea of how he answers questions when they talk to him about certain things. Is he how is he behaving when he's answering these questions, just to get an idea of what is normal behavior for him, so that it can help them to better see when they believe he's lying. This is really useful information, to get to know the person that you're about to be questioning at some point in the future, so that you know what's normal, what's not normal, a little bit to help you determine whether maybe they're making something up, or they're lying, or that their behavior is changing a little bit. So you can see those little tells of, maybe we need to push this a little further.
If a subject is eventually interrogated, it is imperative that the investigator follow all of the criteria established by the courts for a proper interrogation. We teach in all of our training courses, training materials, and books that the interrogator should never make any promises of leniency to the subject, and certainly should not harm the subject or threaten the subject with harm or inevitable consequences.
Okay, so eventually Brendan is interrogated on March 1st. This famous March 1st video of his confession, the one that Ken Kratz blasted all over the media as this horrible, horrible thing that Brendan's been keeping inside of him, and he finally came to tell the truth and tell what really happened. Bullshit. Making promises of leniency, they all did that. We're here to help you. We're not going to leave you, just to hang you out to dry. We're not going to leave you high and dry. We're here to help you. We want to take the information that you give us. We want to take it back to them and ask for them to go easy on you, because you're cooperating, because you're telling us the truth, because you're helping us out. We're going to ask for them to be understanding of that you were forced into this, Leniency. Oh my gosh. Michael Kelly. He basically comes right out and says, I need you to tell me all these things, because he wasn't happy with when the first time Brendan wrote out his confession. During that interview, he wrote out the confession that he's been sticking with the whole time, until someone tries to force him to add more things to it, which is exactly what O'Kelly did. Brendan, I can't help you if that's going to be what you give me. I can't help you with that. You have to tell me all these other horrible, terrible things that you've already admitted to. You got to tell me all these things. You have to explain all these things. You have to give me details. You have to, give me this so I can help you. Then go back to the judge and ask for some leniency for you. Totally lied to him. Totally tricked him. Not okay. They did this.
Furthermore, excessively long interrogations increase the risk of false confessions, so we recommend that if an interrogator does not see any progress in 3 to 4 hours, in other words, the suspect is still adamant in their denials, then the situation should be reassessed. Now, certainly a subject's rights should always be scrupulously honored in a custodial setting. If the suspect asks for an attorney or indicates that they no longer want to answer any questions, absent a public safety exemption, no effort should be made to talk them out of those requests. We should always be sure to give the subject an opportunity to satisfy their physical needs.
Okay. Do not deny the subject of any of their rights. Well, actually, I just skipped one. Do not conduct the interrogation for an excessively lengthy period of time. I don't know. The interviews that they were conducting some of them were pretty long. I don't think they went over 4.5 hours at a time, but he was questioned several times over the course of a couple of days, and that sort of could be, to him, he's got very little time to recover, to sleep, to, just de-stress all that. don't deny the subject of any of their rights. Um, First of all, the very first time they questioned him at his school, they didn't call Barb until the questioning was over with. They didn't even tell her that they were going to go question him. They just pulled him out of class and questioned him, and then when they were done, then they call Barb. Then they tell her about it, and then she comes up there. And after, they send Brendan back to class. And I don't know why, but at some point Brendan comes back. Maybe he heard his mom was there, and I don't know why. He comes back and goes to his mom, and they all leave together, and they take him back and they question him again. She is purposely, and she's purposely told, you don't need to be in here, talked out of it. I don't believe she realizes that she had a right to be in there. I don't believe she thought that they were going to do anything to trick him or fool him or whatever, that they're just trying to get some information out of him if he knows something. I believe totally that she had no idea of the kind of questioning and where eventually this is going to lead that early on. Sorry, my hair is driving me completely crazy. I'm about to put a hat on or something. Do not deny the subject of the opportunity to satisfy their physical needs. At least they did that. They offered him food, they offered him drinks, they offered him breaks, things like that. So that's good, at least.
Another principle that serves as the foundation for the Reid technique is that we teach all investigators to withhold details about the crime from the media and from those individuals whom they might interview, so that when a suspect offers those details in a confession, they can be used to verify the authenticity of that statement. Corroboration, of course, is a key to a confession. There are two primary types of corroboration. The first is independent. This consists of details about the crime that only the guilty person could know, such as the location of the murder weapon, the stolen property, the bloody clothes, etc. Details that the police did not know or have. The second type of corroboration represents details about the crime that the police withheld from the public. We refer to this as dependent corroboration. One of the issues with false confessions in DNA exoneration cases is that many of them are contaminated with details from the crime, details that were apparently disclosed by the police during the questioning of the subject. One way to determine whether the police revealed the details about the crime to the subject, or if the subject had independent knowledge of those details, is to record the questioning of the subject from the outset of the interview to the conclusion of the confession.
Okay, so this one's really good. Withhold information about the details of the crime from the subject so that if the subject confesses, we can evaluate whether or not they disclose details only the guilty would know. Alright, now, do we know that they did that? We know that they did not do that. We know that the media had that shit plastered everywhere. All these details, bones found in the burn pit, bones in the burn barrels, burned items, personal items found in another burn barrel, bones found at the quarry, blood found in the back of the RAV4. The RAV4 is all covered up with debris and things and hidden here on the property. All these things were all over the media. If you watch Kayla, the cousin who was at Brendan's trial on the stand, the defense attorney actually asked her, you couldn't miss it, could you? A 14-year-old girl, you couldn't miss it, could you? It's all over the news. It's everywhere. This information is just all over the place. There's people talking about it. It's being, put all over the news, everywhere. All these details of this crime. I'm sure that that's where she got her made-up story that she gave to her counselor, eventually gave to the police. Not from Brendan, as she finally admitted on the stand. Thank you, Kayla, thank you for saying that. Thank you for telling the truth and not being afraid of them. I have no doubt that they pushed her and pressured her to eventually get her to go to a counselor and tell them this nonsense, and then eventually tell them that nonsense too. But Brendan was exposed, obviously, to all the stuff that was put on the media. He was also, during his questioning and interrogations, all of them, the little seeds were planted, the information that they were feeding him. Okay, he never once, not one time, gave them any information that they didn't have. The only thing I can think of that he told them that could have been looked into and could have been something used to prove that he had knowledge of this crime and he was there, was when he told them that the knife that was used to cut her, stab her, and cut her hair and stuff, they put underneath the seat in her car. Obviously, they looked and there was no knife there. Actually, no knife that was tested at all had any blood, any DNA, any nothing on it. So, that would be the only piece of information that Brendan offered freely, and they could not corroborate with any kind of evidence to back it up. The one piece of information that they withheld from the media in the beginning was that Teresa was shot. They didn't tell everybody this. This is something that the killer would know and the detectives would know and the experts who did the testing. When they found those two pieces of skull fragments that had the beveling on it that they said were consistent with gunshot wounds. This is something that eventually, if you watch the March 1st interrogation, eventually they had to feed him that information too, because that one piece of information that they had that they withheld, like they're told to do, withhold that from the media. Don't tell anybody about this, so that when you get a confession, if you can get this person who's confessing to give that piece of information to you, you know that their confession is real. It's not coerced. It's real. But they completely screwed it up because they fed it to him, because he couldn't give him that information. He couldn't think of it. He's guessing through all this other nonsense, and he couldn't even think of it. Now that's something that you don't forget, that someone was shot in the head. You don't, that's a pretty big memorable thing. You're going to remember, especially when they're very specifically, what about the head, Brendan? Tell us about what else happened to her head. You're not going to forget that she was shot in the head. Come on. But he couldn't tell him that. It's because he couldn't think of it. He couldn't make it up.
Another principle that serves as the foundation for the Reid technique is that the investigator should exercise special precautions when questioning juveniles and individuals with mental or psychological impairments. As one example of these precautions, we recommend that an investigator should not lie about the evidence in the case to a youthful suspect with a low social maturity or a suspect with diminished mental capacity. These individuals may not have the fortitude or confidence to challenge such evidence, and depending on the nature of the crime, may become confused as to their own possible involvement in committing that crime.
Where did we hear this? Exercise special precautions when interviewing juveniles and individuals with mental or psychological impairments. Well, we've got Brendan's psychological evaluation, where it is very clear that he is impaired. He is also quite obviously a juvenile. He just turned 16 when all this happened. Just turned 16 the same month that Teresa was killed. So, he's very obviously a juvenile, and he's very obviously mentally with psychological impairments. So what do they say? Don't lie to them, because they cannot challenge that. You lie to Brendan and tell him, we found your DNA in the car. Why is your DNA in the car, Brendan? And he says it's not. And they say, yes, it is. We found your DNA in the car. They're lying to him and telling him that they have all this evidence that proves that he helped Stephen rape, kill, torture, burn her body, dispose of the evidence. They have all this proof. They're lying to him repeatedly. This is something they're not supposed to do, but they did. And, it got the results they wanted, but they had to violate their training to get all these results.
Another very important principle underlying the Reid technique is that the confession is not the end of the investigation. Investigators should carefully investigate the confession details in an effort to establish the authenticity of the suspect's statement. False confessions are not caused by the application of the Reid technique, but rather they are usually caused by interrogators engaging in improper behavior that is outside of the parameters of the Reid technique, behaviors which the courts have found to be coercive, such as threatening a subject, making promises of leniency, denying them their rights, etc.
Okay, so we know that they obviously did violate this training in order to get this coerced confession. That's exactly how they got it, and if they would have followed their training, they would have known not to question Brendan in this way. And instead of going with their training, to not question him in this way because we'll probably get a coerced confession, they chose to do it anyway. And that's exactly what they got. And then they turned it around and used it against him. Exactly the same goes with the, March 13th questioning after Brendan goes and talks with with Michael Kelly. He talks with Michael Kelly, and then Michael Kelly and Len Kaczynski, they set up another following interview with Wiegert and Fossbender, to where at the very end of that, they threaten Brendan, we're going to tell your mom. If you don't tell her, we're going to tell her. She needs to hear this from you. She's going to eventually see the video anyway and see that you've confessed. You might as well be the one to tell her before we do, because she needs to hear it from you. Don't you think your mom needs to hear it from you? I mean, they're just pushing him to call her and tell her these things right then, that night, right as soon as he leaves that interview room with them. And that's what he did. And what did they do? They turned around and used that against him in his own trial. All the things that he told his mom. Why? Why did they do that? Because they needed Barb's cooperation. They needed her to get off their ass, because she's cooperating and then she's not. She's mama bear going, rawr, what the hell did you do to my son to get him to say all this stuff? Because he's telling me that he didn't do it. So why is he, blah, blah, blah. And I can totally see and understand why she would be constantly harassing them to, what the hell did you do to my kid to get this confession? I sure as hell would be too. And that was the whole purpose of this, was to get Brendan to tell her, yeah, I did this stuff. And also to use it against him in trial. Just another backup. Well, look, he told his mom that he did this stuff. He's not lying. Bullshit. He never would have done that if you hadn't told him to do it. Which is why every bit of this should be thrown out, because that whole interview set up without Kaczynski being there is the whole reason that Kaczynski was removed as his attorney. Thank God that happened. Because of that, the call that was made, that was, forced upon Brendan to make that call, should not have been used against him in court either. The way that they got the confession, coerced confession, none of that should have been used in court against him.
As one U.S. District Court stated, in sum, the proffered expert testimony to the effect that the Reid technique enhanced the risk of an unreliable confession lacked any objective basis for support whatsoever. U.S. v. Jocks, May 2011. For additional discussion and details and case citations for all of the information discussed in this program on false confessions, see Criminal Interrogations and Confessions, 5th edition, 2011.
All right, so that's the end of this little PowerPoint. And somehow I've managed to make a 30-minute video out of a 6.5-minute video PowerPoint because I have a lot of things to say about this. Like I said, I'm going to link this in the description below. I'm also going to link Brendan's psychological evaluation again in the description below. Compare the two. You can very easily see that Brendan was impaired, and you can very easily see that they violated their training and how they questioned Brendan, and this is not okay how they treated him. So his confession is shit. It should not be considered, and hopefully if people can realize that and understand that and accept why that happened, then maybe the fact that he confessed would be a little bit easier to understand. Yeah, so I might do another video just a little bit to expand on this because I've got another article that's got some good information in it about false confessions. So thanks for watching.